Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we talked to Sharan K. Sharan lives in the UK, and she's the creator of the Instagram account Crohn's Babble. She's also the director of digital engagement for the South Asian IBD Alliance. We talked to her about her experience in the UK's healthcare system. We talked to her about information and advice you can find online and how unhelpful it can be sometimes. We talked to her about the importance of self-care, and we talked to her about how she got involved in the creation of IBD Daisies and then South Asian IBD Alliance. Cheers.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey, guys. This is Alicia, and we are really, really excited to be joined by Sharan. Sharan K, you go by. We are so excited to hear your story and especially excited to hear your accent. But we're going to start out by asking you the very unprofessional question of what are you drinking?
Well, I'm actually drinking a cup of tea.
Well, and it is kind of roundabout tea time, isn't it? Like tea time in late afternoon?
Yeah, it's always tea time for me. I drink a lot of tea.
Well, that's been a very popular beverage for a lot of our guests lately. So I think, but yeah, I'm a big tea fan as well. So I totally get it. Robin, what about you?
I am drinking a very refreshing glass of raspberry lemonade.
I'm on my second latte of the day. Sharan, again, we're so excited to have you on the show. Welcome. So next question for you is tell us your IBD story. What brings you to our community?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So my connection to IBD is that I am a Crohn's patient. I was diagnosed back in 2002 after about 6 months of symptoms. I think they came on, from what I remember, quite suddenly, September 2001, and started off with just abdominal pain and diarrhea. And of course, you know, when my mum took me to the GP, it was very, I don't know, I felt like the symptoms were dismissed very quickly and like, oh, it's nothing to worry about, you know, she's fine, her weight seems fine, there's nothing to worry about. I was sent away with indigestion tablets at the time, and they thought like that would be enough. But of course it progressed very rapidly. I'd say from that moment on, I felt like every week my body was deteriorating, and it was just getting to a point where, of course, my parents were getting worried. None of us knew what to really do, and back then we didn't really have access to the information that we have today. You know, we couldn't just jump online and check for the symptoms or what should I be doing. So it was very much just going back and forth with the GP, who seemed very reluctant to refer me on to a specialist because they didn't think it was serious enough. And then, you know, the abdominal pain and diarrhea progressed to the occasional vomiting, which then became vomiting after every meal. So I was just unable to keep any food down at all. And then I couldn't even keep liquids down. So February 2002, my weight dropped down to, I think I was around 28 kilos, and I could barely get myself out of bed. And my mum then just, you know, went to the GP and said, enough is enough. You need to do something. Otherwise, you know, I'm basically just watching my daughter waste away and you're not doing anything about it. And then I was sent directly to the hospital and they admitted me. And I'd say within a week, I was then transferred to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, which is a specialist pediatric GI hospital in London. And they were brilliant. As soon as I was admitted, they were pretty sure that it was IBD, but I was, of course, too weak for them to go straight in and go ahead with the colonoscopy. So I needed blood transfusions first. They tried to just get me to make sure that, you know, it was safe to do the colonoscopy, which of course was scary for my parents as well. I think they thought like things were much worse than what they were, and they didn't know why the blood transfusions were happening and what was going on. And with my parents, you know, I'm from a Punjabi Sikh family, so English isn't my parents' first language. So trying to process all the information that was being thrown at them was quite difficult at the time. And of course I was too young, so I didn't really understand what was going on either. So it was kind of just, you know, we just sent from one scan to the next, and then doctors coming and going, and you're trying to understand what's going on. But then eventually after the colonoscopy, when the consultant sat us down and gave us the diagnosis, I felt relieved but also confused. I think it was like a short moment of relief followed by like fear, because he immediately followed it up with, oh, there's no known cure at the moment. So then that kind of, for all of us, was like, oh, okay, so then what happens from this moment? Where do we go from here? So I'd say at that time it was confusing and I didn't have enough information. And I think I didn't understand the severity of the condition either. I was very much of the belief that they finally found out what's wrong, they're going to fix it, and I'm going to carry on and, go back to school and just carry on with my life now that everything's like they've got to a diagnosis. But it's not quite like that with Crohn's, is it? I feel like that's just the beginning, and then everything that follows on after. It's such like a learning curve with this condition, and I've had it for 22 years now, and I'm still learning things every single day. So from that moment on, I started off with enteral nutrition. So I was given an NG tube for around 12 weeks at the time, which again was quite scary. I didn't want to go to school with it. I felt really uncomfortable. I was always quite a shy kid as it is. So, showing up with a nasogastric tube, I just felt like it was the worst thing that could happen at that time. So the NHS, fortunately, they do homeschooling for children who have conditions that, require some sort of treatment or medication. So for that period, I was homeschooled and I had a tutor come to me, and that really helped. Unfortunately, the enteral nutrition didn't really settle things like they hoped it would. So then I went on to prednisolone, which I was on for quite some time. But then my pediatric GI didn't want to keep me on steroids for too long because, he said you're quite young and we don't want you staying on steroids longer than you need to be, really. So then they decided in 2003 to perform a right hemicolectomy, and he felt that there was a particular kind of part that just they said the inflammation just isn't coming down even with the steroids. So he felt that if they were to perform the surgery, then hopefully putting me on azathioprine after that would be more effective. So I went ahead with the surgery. Again, I remember thinking like I felt like surgery was the absolute last resort treatment option. So I thought if they're performing surgery, this is it. Like they're going to fix me and I'm going to be better again. I think every time I've had something in terms of treatment, I thought like this is it now. This is the point where I'm going to get better. But it never quite works that way. And I remember talking to one of my teachers back then, and coincidentally, her husband had Crohn's, and she said to me, she's like, I don't want to put you out, but my husband's had like 10 operations and he's still quite poorly. So she's like, go into this with an open mind. Like, don't think that this is going to solve everything. So I think having that conversation with her was, it was good. And I think that was like the reality check that I needed. But after the surgery, things were well for for a few years. And I managed to get through school and go off to university. And I remained on azathioprine for those few years. Then when I got to university, I started flaring again. And I think it was a mixture of like the stress of being at university and also transitioning to adult care from pediatric care. My pediatric care was brilliant, like no complaints whatsoever. But then transitioning to adult care, I realized how different things were and how much they just put on the patients to take care of. And it's almost like if you don't make that contact, they're quite happy to just leave you trying to figure out things on your own. I was under that GI that I was transferred to, I'd say for around 5 years, and I met him once in clinic through that 5-year period. It was always like a junior doctor that would see me in clinic instead. And I felt like every single appointment I would have to, from the point of diagnosis to where I was at that present time, go through my entire story over and over again, what I've had done, the surgery I've had done. And I was like, this is exhausting. Like, I feel like I spend the 15 minutes you get me just going through my journey, and then you give me 2 minutes at the end to ask any questions I have, and then I get sent away with no solution, really. I was on steroids for that 5-year period, on and off prednisolone, and at no point did the doctors think that they needed to escalate the medication or try to find something else that needed doing. And I didn't really have the knowledge back then to know that I needed to push them to do something more. I kind of just assumed that steroids is probably the best option for me, and this is just how it's going to be for the rest of my life. But of course, steroids have so many side effects, and taking them at a young age isn't a great thing either. So after, I don't know why I waited so long, but when it got to like my 5th year at university, I was just tired of having to go back and forth. I was admitted, I think in every year I had like 3 or 4 admissions into hospital, which takes so much out of you. And then going back into like the whole kind of studying pattern of things, I was just behind with everything. So then I asked my GP to transfer me to a new GI. And that's when things really kind of changed for me. And he's brilliant. I'm still under that same GI now. He was frustrated for me. He's like, I can't believe you've been on steroids for so long and you're so young. Like, this should never have been the case. And I was like, yeah, but I didn't know any different. I would expect doctors to kind of take the initiative to say, like, this is not the right path for you. Clearly, it's not helping your condition. Let's try and do something more. So he said, I'm going to treat you as if you're a brand new patient. You've just been diagnosed today, and we're going to go through all the scans and everything again. And he really pushed for me to get onto infliximab. At the time, even back then, it wasn't readily available. They kind of approved it for severe cases because of NHS funding. It goes through the local primary care trusts, and they basically assess your case and decide if this patient is severe enough for the funding to be approved for a biologic. I was rejected twice, and my GI, of course, he wasn't happy that they kept rejecting it. And within that period, I had been admitted into hospital 3 times. On the third admission is when they finally approved it. And the same day I had it, I immediately started to feel better. It felt like a miracle drug to me. I was so surprised at a difference in the morning that day and the evening after the first infusion. I was like, I've just been going back and forth for 5 years. Why did they not do this years ago? But it was good to kind of start that when I did, because I was in my final year at university and I was trying my best to graduate, because if I didn't graduate, I'd already repeated 2 years. So my degree was only actually 3 years long, but I'd needed to repeat my second year, and then I repeated my third year. And if I wanted to repeat another year, there was just loads of expenses involved. And also I was done. I was so over education at that point. I was like, I need to just get out of this degree and out of university. I don't ever want to come back again. So I was like, there's no way I want to stick around for another year. You have to do something. You have to get me better. Thankfully, it worked out, and the infliximab really helped me get through that final year. And then from that point on, I was on infliximab for a short while, but the 8 weekly infusions didn't seem to be doing enough to keep me well. Around the 6-week mark, I used to start to feel poorly again. So they felt that switching to adalimumab might be a better option, because they were fortnightly injections and I could do them at home myself. So they thought, you're young, you probably don't want to come into hospital every 8 weeks for infusions anyway. It takes a lot out of your time. So let's switch you over to adalimumab. And we made the switch over, started at weekly injections to make sure things were settled. And I stayed on adalimumab for about almost 10 years. And I thought, okay, I've finally got something that, it's working for me. I'm settled. And it just felt good to finally have, my life back in a way. And it took so long to get there. And I think a lot of it's frustrating in a way, because I feel like we're made to feel as patients that it falls on us, that, we didn't do what we needed to do to get the care that we need. But a lot of the decisions that have been made with my care, it's down to the clinicians not doing what they needed to do. And with IBD, over the years, I've learned that you have to be proactive with this condition. As soon as you start seeing symptoms, or as soon as you start noticing a relapse, you have to act fast. And that was one thing I felt like they never did. I would always end up back in hospital, and then I would spend a week on steroids administered intravenously, and then I was sent home with tablets. But it was just like a cycle, and it repeated itself every few months, and I just felt like I wasn't really getting anywhere. So going on to the biologics was a real game changer for me. But in 2013, unfortunately, I developed a stricture, and initially my GI said, well, just keep an eye on it and see how things go. If it doesn't get any worse, then we can just leave it as it is, because I didn't really have any symptoms, so he was fine to just leave things as they are. But with that as well, things deteriorated quite rapidly, and it went from completely fine to really bad within a few months. So initially I was referred to the surgical team, and they left it with me. Basically, they said, we can operate and perform a subtotal colectomy, and you may need an ileostomy or you may not. And at that time I had no idea what a stoma is or an ileostomy. I'd never even seen one, and for some reason I just didn't want to look it up either, because I thought if I look it up and I try to read up about it, I might be even more afraid of going down that route if I need to. So I kind of I think I just neglected the advice, and I thought, I'm not going to focus on that. Things are fine as they are for now. But they did initially try a dilatation. And when that didn't work, my surgeon said that, okay, we probably do need to perform surgery because we couldn't dilate it. So, things are quite bad at the moment, and we don't want to delay things and, get to a point where you become completely obstructed. So I had surgery planned for around May time. This was in 2014. But then in February, so my GI had said to me, if you notice like you develop a fever, and he mentioned a few other symptoms, then you need to come into A&E right away. And that week, for some reason, my weight dropped from, I think I was at like 48, and it dropped to 45 just in that week, and I had a fever as well. So I thought, okay, something's not right here. Went to A&E and they admitted me straight away. And then I think 4 days later I had emergency surgery and they performed the subtotalectomy, and I woke up with an ileostomy. So it happened sooner than I think. I wasn't really mentally prepared for it. And when I woke up with the stoma, of course, it was a shock to the system because I didn't know like the mechanism. All they did was like a stoma nurse came around to see me and marked an X on my stomach. I had no idea what I was going to wake up with or how, I'm going to manage it. In my mind, I assumed that having a stoma is similar to having a catheter. And I thought there was going to be some kind of like pipe coming out of somewhere leading to a bag, and I would just have to change the bag every so often. I wasn't really sure of how it's going to work. But then when I saw the stoma, I thought, okay, this is different. And the size of my stoma was really big when I first woke up from surgery. And it just looked a bit scary. It was like, that's my intestine sticking out of my stomach. Didn't expect to see it. And when they kept saying to me that it's so discreet, you're not even going to notice it when you've got your clothes on, I was like, how am I going to hide this thing? It was huge. But then they kept saying to me, it's going to shrink. Don't worry. It's going to, like, over time, it shrinks to the size that it's then going to be for, the rest of your life or however long you have it. And thankfully it did. Over a few weeks, I had a very small, tiny, my nurses always used to say that it's a very pretty stoma, because it was very small. And I was very lucky with my stoma. I had no kind of skin issues, no irritation. Like, I've seen some people suffering with raw skin and, really struggling to keep their stoma bags on. I was very lucky. I think the only issue I had was that when it did shrink, it got to a point where it was so small that the bags I was given, they weren't working anymore and it started leaking. But of course, I didn't know what I needed to do. And then someone suggested online, I was on these forums, to try convex bags, and then that resolved the issue. So from there, I was like, okay, having a stoma, it's not so bad. And I'd say it took me about 6 months to come to terms with having it and getting used to it. And then after that, I was fine. But then when it came down to, I think around 2.5 years after the surgery, my GI said that if you want to consider having a reversal, we would be open to it, because he said, like, your health, everything looks fine, you're in remission, and I'd be comfortable with you having surgery if you needed to. I was quite reluctant, but I think like social pressures and just there was a part of me that really felt quite uncomfortable, like my body image and stuff, and just like being in a relationship, I didn't quite know how to go about having that conversation with someone and letting them know that I have a stoma. So I feel like a lot of outside factors kind of contributed to me going ahead with the reversal. If I could go back, I would probably not go ahead with the reversal, because I was completely fine with having a stoma. I was comfortable, I was working, I used to play netball twice a week, and I'd go swimming, I was traveling. So there was nothing the stoma was really stopping me from doing. So when I think back, I'm like, I don't know why I did that, because after, I'd say about 6 months after my reversal, I started flaring again. And since then, it has been a bit rocky. So the adalimumab, of course, stopped working for me around that time. And then I was eventually put onto ustekinumab in 2019, at the end of 2019. When I started that, it was a very gradual improvement with that drug, like compared to infliximab, which, I felt worked instantly. Ustekinumab took about 3 or 4 months to show any signs of like that it's working. It did eventually kick in, and I have been on that since. But I am currently in a mild flare again. So they're just trying to figure out what to do. So yeah, it's been very up and down over the years, but I think I generally have quite a positive outlook on life. So you just kind of take what life throws at you and carry on, keep going.
You learned a lot of things along the way. So you mentioned being online. At what point did you find out that there were these communities online that you really could use to find this information? And then how did you kind of discern what was the best information to take away? Because certainly there's a lot of not so positive and or factual information on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always avoided the internet for like medical advice up until I had a stoma. When I had the stoma surgery, I genuinely couldn't think of where else to go. It was like, I don't know anyone else who has one. I have no idea where to even look for a support group. The stoma nurses were, of course, great, to go and chat to, but I couldn't go to them like every day if I wanted to. In the process of, setting up an appointment to meet with them, it wasn't as straightforward as just, I really need to speak to someone. Can I come see you? So I thought, I'm just going to have a look online and see, who else is out there with a stoma. And then you realize there's this huge community of people that are online. And it turns out around that time, I think I'd say about 3 weeks after my surgery, there was a girl who went viral. She was on the beach with an ostomy bag and she was wearing a bikini, and the post took off. And I was like, it's so interesting how it happened around that time. But it gave me that kind of reassurance that, you're going to be okay with an ostomy if this is what it's going to be, for the rest of your life. And that led me to, so the forum I joined was with Crohn's and Colitis UK. They have an online forum. And I thought, because they do kind of monitor, the comments that go up on there and what everyone is saying, the advice should be, it won't be anything that is misleading in any way, or I won't be misinformed, hopefully. So I felt like that was the best place for me. And from there, of course, I came across like companies who would provide support wear for ostomates and, people just sharing the day to day. I feel like, you go to a stoma nurse or you can go to your clinicians and ask them questions, but the day to day stuff like, oh, how do I get rid of this annoying itch that just doesn't seem to go away? That information you're only going to find from another ostomate because they deal with that day to day. So I found it really useful for having an ostomy. But I agree, like generally when it comes to like managing my Crohn's, I've found that the internet isn't always the best place for me, because I always find that I get a lot of dietary advice given to me, even with my page when I started Crohn's Babble on Instagram. If I would post something food related or, that I'm not feeling too great, I would get comments upon comments of like, you need to do this, you need to try this diet, or you need to give this a go. And it's, I appreciate the advice, but I also kind of think to myself, it's not really what I'm looking for. Like, I didn't ask for that advice. And with my diet, I've always struggled with my diet. And, the few times that I was so fed up of kind of going back and forth with a flare, I thought, okay, let me try this diet. It was plant-based whole food diet, I think I tried, and it made me so much worse. And then I spoke to my GI and, she said, you can't really expect these diets to help when you're in a flare. She's like, I absolutely understand that diet is important and you're more than welcome to, give them a go when you're feeling well to help it kind of manage your condition. But she said to me, she's like, if you're in a flare, I would highly advise you not to try, a new diet that could make things so much worse because you're already not feeling well. So I thought, okay, I'm going to stick to the professional advice I get from my GI and not just try to follow diets that I see online. And I know that diet is important, but I think the advice sometimes you get online can make you feel bad for not trying hard enough with your own condition and trying to manage it, which I have felt a few times. And I kind of think, oh, maybe I'm just not doing enough to take care of myself. And maybe I need to try harder, because there's people out there who are trying, all these diets or therapies and they seem really well. But then I think we have to remember that IBD in general is so individual and it's so specific to each person that what works for me might not work for the next person. So if I see others doing well on specific diets or even specific therapies, I try not to think like, oh, maybe I need to try that, because this disease is so individual that it's never going to be one size fits all.
You are so much nicer than I would be in a situation with people giving advice about diet. Is like my pet peeve because it is so individual. What other people consider healthy is actually very painful for me. So why would I want to try that? But in addition to that, it's like, if diet worked, wouldn't we all be doing it? I mean, if that was all it took for me to not have surgery and not, end up in the hospital, and like, if we all got on this one diet and it made us all better, why would we not all do that? So whenever anyone wants to give me diet advice, I just thank you, but no thank you.
It also implies that they don't think that you've tried it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, I know lots of people with IBD who, like you said, it's like, let me just try this. It's probably not going to hurt me. And who knows if it's going to help. Yeah. Like you don't know if they've already tried it, but I do agree. I'm glad you brought up the point of it makes you feel like you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
And as well-intentioned as people are when they say this, it can make people feel like the onus is back on them to that they, just haven't done enough. And that's really damaging. And I don't think people realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the one thing I've learned over the years, that for some reason with IBD in particular, because so many people associate it as being a diet condition, they do like to put the blame back on the patient. Like, oh, you're just not doing enough of this, or you're not doing this, or you're not meditating, or you're not clearing your mind, and you're too stressed out. And I'm like, life is stressful. I don't know how to not stress. And with the diet, exactly as you said, Robin, it's frustrating because we would all be doing the same thing if we knew that this one thing works. And like you said as well, Alicia, that like to make that assumption that, oh, you probably haven't tried this yet. Like I've had Crohn's for 22 years now. I've probably tried everything, and I've seen everything. And when I get these recommendations, I think you've probably just gone on Google and you came across an article and you thought, oh, Sharan has Crohn's. Let me go tell her. Like, yeah, I've seen 1,000 of those articles. It's been so many years. So I appreciate that, you think of me when you see this stuff and you think maybe it's going to help you. But like, I think just having that understanding that, oh, she probably knows better, it's her body, it's her, she's the one living with this condition. Because I remember I was working at, it was in a hospital actually in 2019. So I'm a radiographer by profession, and that's what I studied. But I decided to give it up a few years ago because for my health, it just wasn't working out. But when I was retraining to go back into radiography in 2019, one of the radiographers said to me, she was like, my friend, she has Crohn's and she has been on a juicing like diet for about 5 weeks, and she's, completely fine now. And she's healed herself. And she's like, you should really give it a go, because they knew I was kind of flaring at the time. That was the time when I was in between before starting ustekinumab, and they were trying to figure out like what the next step would be. So I was working, but I was flaring quite badly as well. But I had made the hospital aware, the team that I was working with, that, if I do need extra bathroom breaks, or if, I'm not in certain days, it's because of my health. But then it was that advice that I kept getting from the people I was working with. And, I got to a point where I was like, I really appreciate you kind of giving me this advice. But at that point, I was like, I've had this now for 17 years. And for me personally, I just don't think juicing is going to help fix what I'm going through. Like
It
I
sounds
had,
painful, honestly. Like
yeah,
to me, like I'm gonna be torturing myself for a week trying to do juicing. That's what it
yeah.
sounds like.
I think with a lot of diet, I find that it's just going, for me personally, I just don't think it's worth it.
Mhm.
It's a lot of stress, mentally and physically exhausting. I think one thing I've always struggled with people understanding is that we don't have the energy levels that, the average healthy person has. So even preparing for these diets, or going out and shopping, for all these particular diets, and then coming home and preparing the meals, that part of it is difficult for me as well.
Yeah.
When I'm flaring, that's the last thing I want to be doing. I just about manage to like, I'll go and make some toast or something, or I usually go back onto a liquid diet and have Complan shakes to help me when I'm flaring. But the last thing I want to do is trying to cook up all these,
Mhm.
elaborate meals trying to help me, because I just don't have the energy. Like I barely get through the day when I'm in a flare. So trying to figure out a new diet to see how it might help me, but it also might make things much worse,
Yeah.
is not something I'm prepared to do.
I think our well-meaning friends and family also don't understand that IBD is a spectrum disease. Her friend who is doing the juicing might be a mild case. And
Yeah.
then she does the juicing and it has healed her mucosa and she's fine. But somebody who has a more severe disease course, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, as like IBD disease, when we formed, I think that's the part we have really tried to focus on, that this is a spectrum disease, that, when we get caregivers asking for advice for their children, or, we have patients themselves who are newly diagnosed, like, how did you come out of your flare? And we're like, there's not a simple answer for that, because it's so different for everyone. And like you said, it's so different in terms of severity. So I think online can be quite difficult for that reason, because you see people thriving and doing well, but they might have a very mild case and they might actually be on a diet that's working for that mild case. But then I've seen some very severe conditions, far more severe than I have. And ever since their diagnosis, they have not been able to hit remission, and they've just been trying and trying everything they can. So in a way, it makes me realize, and I think being online helps me in the sense that I get to see people who are worse off. And it shouldn't be that we need to see patients who have it harder than I do to, feel like, oh, why am I complaining? But for me, that helps. It makes me realize that, yeah, I'm going through stuff, but I'm still able to get through the day. I'm still able to work, and I do have some form of like quality of life. Whereas some of these patients are really, really struggling and they don't have that quality of life. They don't have their life at all. And I think sometimes you have to see that to realize that there is a massive difference with, the severity of this condition. And if you have a mild case, I don't think it's entirely fair to make people who have severe cases feel like they aren't trying hard enough in trying to manage their condition. And I think with certain influencers that I've seen who, do push like diet therapies, that is the case. Like, it's worked for them because they probably have a mild case, but they are reaching out and they are speaking to a community of varying, severities of this condition. So it's tricky. I think IBD is generally a tricky condition to offer any kind of advice for. So even when I like the voluntary work I do with Crohn's and Colitis UK, I do virtual support groups with them on a regular basis. And I always keep the advice very much like, so this works for me, but I absolutely am not advocating that it might work for you or it might not. Or if you hear anyone else in this group saying that, they're on a certain diet or they're taking, or, they've gone down like a natural remedy route, if it's working for them, be mindful that it might not work for you, because you might have a different level of severity with this condition compared to the person that's, sharing that advice. It's very tricky sharing advice with IBD. Like, it's so hard to know like what to say, even between patients. It's so hard to give that kind of advice. For me personally, I always stick to professional advice, and I do always, if I see stuff online, I'm more than happy to take it to my GI and I will discuss like, oh, so I saw that, this therapy works. So what do you think? Or even with certain biologics, because I'm flaring at the moment, they're trying to figure out, do I need to change to a new medication, or can we add on another medication to the ustekinumab that I'm currently taking? So even with that, like, I've seen stuff and I'm like, okay, so if I take all these questions to her, then we can discuss. And I'm very comfortable in knowing that they are going to give me the best advice suited to my condition. And it's not just going to be generic advice that we find that is being applied to the entire IBD community.
Yeah, that is the best advice I think you can give, is to say, your GI is the best advocate with you. And so taking that information and those questions to your team, your GI team, is going to be the best option for you. You mentioned IBD diabetes, and for those folks that may not be familiar with it, can we ask you to tell us what exactly is that and talk us through a little bit about that community you've built?
Yeah, sure. So IBD disease came about, I think it was in 2021 now. And before that, so I was online. Crohn's Babble came about during COVID, I think it was. Before that, of course, I was volunteering with Crohn's and Colitis UK. And I felt like I finally found my people, I guess. I think before that, I never really spoke up about my condition. Even with my family, like, they have a level of understanding and they're very supportive, but you don't get the same level of support from your family or friends that you do from people who actually have IBD as well. So when I started doing like the coffee mornings with Crohn's and Colitis UK, it made me feel better. I felt like it was almost like a therapy session for us, and we all would get together and just talk about our conditions and, share advice, share tips. And it was great. So when COVID hit and that kind of came to a stop, I felt like I needed something to keep me going. So I started my page on Instagram, and then that led me to meeting Tina, Own Your Crohn's, and Madhura, who's from Chennai, and then Suraksha as well. She was also based in UK at the time. Tina's, of course, in New York. And we all kind of came together, and one thing we noticed was that there's the representation for South Asians in the IBD community, online and offline. It's quite limited. And I think that leads people to believe that this this isn't really a condition that affects South Asians. In fact, my GP 22 years ago, at the time of my diagnosis, admitted that he didn't think it could be IBD that I had because he had never seen Crohn's or colitis in South Asian patients, especially in children. And so he admitted to my parents that that was what led to the delays in referring me on to a specialist. But that kind of misconception is something we're still seeing today. And when, Tina, Madhura, Sraksha and I got together and we started talking about our experiences, we realized how similar they were and how underrepresented we felt in the IBD community. And I think part of that comes down to the South Asian community in general being quite reserved when it comes to speaking up about any kind of illness or any medical conditions that they might have. Like, I'd say we're a very private community and you don't just, get together and start talking about health conditions. And I felt this as like growing up, if I would go to a family gathering or like a wedding or something, I always had to put on like a brave face as if I was completely fine, even if I was flaring. And there were so many occasions where I was on fully dosed up on codeine. I had no idea like what was going on. I was so dizzy and so like just out of it that I'd be at these family gatherings trying to just act like everything was fine because I didn't want extended family to know what I was going through. But then they still pick up on things because you're not eating properly or your plate's empty or why aren't you eating? And I'd have to make excuses like, oh, I had food before, I came here. But it just becomes this really like you just have to put on an act all the time, and that's exhausting. But it just felt like the norm for us, and the four of us felt like we had all had to do that at some point in our lives. And then what I mentioned before with my parents, English isn't their first language. The information wasn't really delivered to them in a format that they could understand, and they were never offered an interpreter. So I felt that kind of affected how we looked at this condition as well. If everything had been talked through, and they had been, I think, told how severe this condition can get, I think maybe all of us would have taken it more seriously. But that level of understanding was never given to us, or that level of information. And that comes down to, the model patient we felt like is a white patient, and everything is kind of catered to kind of their lifestyle. Even the dietary advice I was given by the dietitian when I was diagnosed, I didn't really eat half of the stuff that was on that list anyway, because I had a South Asian diet. My mum would be making home cooked meals and all like the dals and, everything that she would make. She was like, what do I do with this now? Like, how do I change the food that we eat at home to help you? There was no one there to tell us how to make those modifications. And there was no kind of, I feel like they never even approached that conversation. Like they didn't even think like maybe because she is South Asian, she has a different diet at home. So maybe we need to try and figure out how we can help her through the type of diet that she's on. So I think that cultural competency has really been lacking over the years. And I think in a way to address that, and just to make people feel like, they had a community that understood what they were going through as South Asian patients, the four of us came together and formed IBD This Is. It started off as a private group on Facebook because, as you both mentioned earlier, it's hard to know where to go for advice online because you don't know if it's, the correct information or if it's even, something that you want to tempt in terms of like therapies and things. And up until that point, I'd only ever used Crohn's and Colitis UK's forum on Facebook. I think Tina and Madhura had experienced several other groups that they felt were in some ways misinformed, but also they would look down on you if you were going down, like the medication route, if that's what you felt was helping you, or if you were going down the surgical route. There was a lot of judgment, and we wanted to create a safe space that basically held no judgments whatsoever. If you felt that surgery was the best thing for you, or if you felt that, medication is the best route for you, we wanted everyone to feel comfortable in the decisions that they're making for their health. The Facebook group took off quite quickly, and, we had positive feedback from people all across the world, mostly, in India, Pakistan, parts of South Asia. They felt that they had a community that they could come to and feel less isolated with this condition because it's not something that you can openly talk about. So from there, we then, we created social media accounts for IBD This Is as well. And we felt that sharing our personal stories, but also inviting people in our group to share their stories if they wanted to, would help people understand IBD from a South Asian patient's perspective, and, how we manage with our diets and how we get through all these incredible like religious festivals that we have in each of our cultures, because there are so many. And I think for a lot of us, they can be difficult to get through because we tend to, as patients, either uninvite ourselves, or even if you're there, you feel like you're not really included because you're isolated from the food that's there or the conversations that are happening. So I think creating the community really helped people have that community where they can just feel like they, have somewhere they can come to. And it's been growing since we started it. And, we've seen people making decisions for their health that maybe, 2 years ago they might have been reluctant to, based on the information. Anything that we share, if it's medical advice, we make sure there's always sources to back it up. Or, like any new drug information we share, we'll always share resources to back it up. And, so that it's factual information rather than just, we've seen this diet online and it might work, it might not. Rather than doing that, we make sure it's factual information. And then IBD This led on to kind of teaming up with a group of lovely clinicians. And then we formed South Asian IBD Alliance from there. And we've been growing with that. We have like live chats, and we share resources, and even that's doing really well. And I think the feedback that we've had is that, there was a gap for this and it needed filling, and the community that we're creating is hopefully helping people. I mean, we've seen that it's helping people in, parts of South Asia where they don't have immediate access to this information, or they might not have it in a way that they can understand it. So it's quite limited at the moment, but we try to share information in various different languages. We try to bring that cultural competency into kind of the IBD care pathway so that they're able to manage their condition in a way that works with who they are as a person. With diet especially, we have lots of people sharing, their South Asian diets. And I think that has been a huge help, even for myself, because I've never really known where to find that information until we formed IBD This, because I mean, it's very specific, I think, to each culture, and no one is really sharing that information except for other South Asian IBD patients. So bringing them all together, I think, is helping all of us as well. And it's really eye-opening in a sense that, for me, I realized how much information I could have had at the point of diagnosis that helped me as a South Asian patient, which I didn't have. So hopefully going forward, the information we continue to provide and the support we continue to provide is helping, the next generation of patients that might feel exactly as I did. And actually, very recently, I spoke to someone who went through pretty much all the same stuff I did, but 5 years ago. So for me to go through that like in 2002, and for her to go through it in 2018, the exact same experience, it makes you realize that not much has improved in terms of, being proactive with getting diagnoses for IBD and understanding cultural competency and realizing that this is a condition that can affect everyone. It's not specific to like a certain group of people. It can affect absolutely anyone.
So the folks that are coming to IBD-DACs, the obviously commonality is that they're South Asian, but that means they live all over the place. I mean, you're talking about Tina's in the United States, you're in the UK, Madhura's in India. So, and I know Tina has mentioned that there's even people, from some African countries that have started to reach out as well. And so all of these have different healthcare systems. All of these have different access to treatments. How do you navigate that with the people that reach out that are, seeking help and seeking answers when you can't know how all of these different systems works? I'm really mystified on how you basically serve the entire world with all these different crazy systems.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think for the most part, of course, because Tina's in the US, she has a great understanding of the US system and how that works. And with me being in the UK, I've got a good understanding here. Madhura is in India, so she has an excellent understanding of how, the healthcare system is working there. But I think forming SIRE and having like the clinicians on board, and, we've got various clinicians who are based around India, and we've got some in Pakistan. So we're gathering an understanding from them. And also, I think a lot of the patients that join us, they're helping us understand as well. And they're helping us understand, what's lacking or quality of care in whatever part of the world they're from. So I think it's a learning experience for all of us. We're learning a lot from the patients that join us, and they share their experience and they talk through what they're going through. I think one of the most eye-opening things for me was to realize that, the medication that's available to most of us here in the UK and the US, they can only dream of having access to that in certain parts of South Asia. So I feel like I have to be so mindful, when I share my journey and my experience and when I give advice, because I don't want to make it seem like, well, you just need to be on this medication, because we have to have that understanding that they might not even have access to that medication. And the prices of some of these drugs in parts of South Asia is astronomical. Like, I can't imagine how someone could function and basically fund like the household and like day-to-day living, and also provide for the medication that they need. It's really difficult. In that sense, like, I feel very privileged to have access to the NHS here in the UK, because my biologics are funded through the NHS. So I've been very lucky in a sense that funding isn't an issue that I've had to ever really think about or worry about, and like insurance isn't something that I've had to worry about, because like even the US and UK have different struggles, and what we go through here in the UK is very different to what patients in the US go through, but what we go through in the diaspora is very different to what they go through in South Asia. So I think learning along the way from patients that join our group, and of course the clinicians that we work with on SIRE, I think that's part of trying to understand. And as you mentioned, we've had people from parts of Africa, and even like some patients in China have reached out, because I think they share similar experiences in the sense that, they're a very reserved community, and talking about their health isn't something that's so openly discussed. So I think having various people reach out to us is how we navigate, and we're able to provide that advice for particular countries. And of course, if we don't know, like Tina has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to IBD. She knows everything there is to know about IBD, I feel. And she also has like access to great contacts who we can reach out to if we don't have an understanding of a certain healthcare system in a country and we don't know how it works. Then we try to find someone that might be able to help us with that, because like I said, we don't want to overstep and give advice when we don't even know what the situation is for them in that country. We've had patients speak to us from Malaysia, for example, and they've said that it's barely even a recognized condition there, and there's not a lot of understanding around the condition. So I think that changes and makes things quite difficult as well, not just like the healthcare system. If there's no kind of knowledge or understanding of the condition, then I feel like you're having to fight that much harder, to get the care that you need, or to even get, clinicians to understand what you're going through. Part of what I struggled with here, and I've spoken to so many patients here in the UK through the Crohn's and Colitis UK forums that I do, that have just spent years misdiagnosed, or they just haven't been referred on to a specialist. And it's really heartbreaking to see that it's still happening. Like, it happened to me 22 years ago, but it's still happening today. And there's people who are still waiting months or years to get that diagnosis because their GPs aren't taking them seriously enough. So the fact that even here it's a struggle to recognize these symptoms, and people aren't understanding, that these symptoms could likely lead to IBD, and this patient probably does need a colonoscopy. There's a lot of pushback. You'll get GP saying, well, let's do a stool test first, and then, we'll go from there. So that adds another few weeks to you living with these symptoms. And then the stool test comes back, and then, they might say, well, let's just try this medication first and see how it works. Like, I was given like anti-indigestion tablets, and I spent weeks on those. I don't even know why I was given them, because I was like, I don't have indigestion. Like, I have abdominal pain and diarrhea. So I'm not really sure how you've come to this conclusion, but I guess I'll take your word for it. So it's frustrating because you expect the professional, to be providing you with the advice that you need. But when it doesn't quite add up, I think the great thing about the internet is that you can question professional advice today, whereas back in that day, we couldn't. I didn't have anywhere to go, to find information or to figure out, is this the right thing or should they be doing more? Whereas what I love about the community that has, I'd say like all of us patients have built online today, is that we can question the advice that we're getting, or we can ask, like, is this enough? Are you doing enough to take care of me? So yeah, I think it comes around to just like shared experiences and learning learning from one another. And that's one thing that we've always done with IBD This. We may have formed the group, but we do absolutely take on the advice and information that we get from everyone inside the group as well.
I feel like we could talk to you for another 24 hours. But unfortunately, we have reached that time of our conversation. It has been so lovely speaking to you, but now I have to ask you the last question. So what is the one piece of advice you have for the IBD community?
I'd say my one piece of advice is always going to be that having this condition should not hopefully stop you from, continuing on with your life. When I see in our group, a lot of parents, they have so many concerns and they're so worried, and rightfully so. When your child is diagnosed with a lifelong condition, it's terrifying. But what I try to tell them is that, I've had it for 22 years. I managed to go to university. I've got my degree, and I've tried to do as much with my life as I can. But I think the most important thing to remember is that you are going to be doing this at your own pace. Your timeline is probably going to be different from your peers, but that's completely okay. It doesn't matter if you take 5 or 10 years at university, or if you don't go to university, if that's not for you, or if you need time out from work, if you need to be with your family, or if you need to live with your parents until you're like 50, if that's what works for you, do what works for you, because our timelines are just so different from a regular healthy person, because the day-to-day of living with this condition is so difficult. It's really hard to plan your life around a lifelong condition. So I think the topmost priority should always be your health, and then everything else just fits in alongside it. I think for a long time I didn't have that mentality, and I was pushing myself constantly, like, okay, so I have Crohn's, but that doesn't mean I can't go to university. And part of me regrets the decisions I made, because I just made myself sicker by pushing through and not realizing that I can just stop. I can take a break. I don't need to be doing everything else that like my friends or my cousins are doing. So whenever I speak to young people and young people's parents in particular, I'm always adamant about the fact that take care of yourselves first. Everything else will fall into place after that.
Lovely advice. And something that I think, just the way the world is, a lot of us push through or try to push through. That's why I'm in therapy, everyone. That is why I'm in therapy.
That's very much a cultural thing too. I think the United States and the UK and various places, it's very much pressure for you to strive. And
it is. And you just feel like you're a failure if you don't keep pushing. Like if I spend a week in bed, I should feel completely fine with spending a week in bed. I shouldn't be made to feel like, it shouldn't make me feel guilty for wanting to rest my body, because we deserve that. When I used to have sick days from work, I used to feel so guilty, and I used to feel like I had to overperform to make up for the fact that I was sick. But now I just think, if I'm sick, I'm sick. If it affects my job, I'll find a new job. Like I'm just never in a position anymore where I'm going to allow myself to feel guilty for things that are completely outside of my control with this condition. And I think, like you said, it is a cultural thing, and we do have this pressure, especially like as women. Like I feel like I have constant pressure to get married, have kids, and I'm thinking, I can barely take care of myself. I don't think I want to add a family into that, not anytime soon anyway. So I think just let people be. We don't know what other people are going through with their lives or how they're getting through day by day. So I think just like these milestones that we set, we just need to get rid of them and let people just exist.
Yes, for everybody, not even just people living with chronic illnesses, but let people live their lives.
That's right.
Yeah.
On their own terms, frankly.
That's right.
Sharon, such an absolute pleasure to get to know you and to spend this time with you. Seriously, it was so much fun. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you everyone else for listening as well. And cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Hi, this is Sharon. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it with your friends.